I used to take terrible notes. By the time I finished, I retained barely anything. So I tried to review them again, and my retention went up a little bit, but the notes were trash to begin with, so I'd review them again and again. Sometimes it helped, but sometimes it didn't. This was an unreliable way to study, and I just kept wondering, how many reviews does it take to get to this point? Well, it turns out that's the wrong question to ask entirely. I had it completely backwards. The real question is, how do I make this very first view as effective as possible? Eliminate the need for multiple reviews and retain as much as possible from the very beginning. Well, turns out there's a lot of ways, but today we're focusing on a method called associations. Associations can happen in many ways, like if you have tons of information on the page, you can associate them down to 2 or 3 groups depending on their characteristics. This is called chunking. Or if you have a giant paragraph of information, you can associate it with a single image that is faster for the brain to interpret and understand. This is called visualization. Associating things together can take many forms, but fundamentally, it's just about connecting ideas together. Because ultimately, we just want to condense and process our messy notes into study material that we can actually use for review. So here's a simple framework that will help you associate complex topics in a way that's easy to remember. Step 1 is to simplify the concept, and step 2 is to associate the idea to something similar that you already know. An easy way to simplify something is to break it down so that even a child can understand it. Apparently, half of American adults have a reading level below 6th grade, so let's just say a child is someone who is 5th grade or less. Basically, you don't want to use fancy language, you want to leave out the names of complicated key terms, and you want to keep the details out. Step 2 is to find prior knowledge you have that is similar to the idea and associate them together. So the way that memory works is that you want to take this new unknown piece of info, you want to connect it to a bunch of other information that you already have in your web of knowledge. And a memorable way to make these connections is by using familiar imagery, analogies, or stories. So let's go through some examples and it'll make a lot more sense. Okay, so for this example, I'm going to use associations to better understand and remember chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD. So let's take a look at the notes here. COPD is a group of lung diseases characterized by inflammation and constriction of the airways, leading to symptoms like dyspnea. Okay, let's just stop right here for a second. Imagine having to read this entire paragraph every time you want to review this topic. That's way too much reading, it's going to take way too long, but that's what a lot of students do without even realizing. So the goal is to condense this paragraph down with associations. So step 1 is simplify. And already I see way too many big words here that a 5th grader would not understand, so let's simplify those. Inflammation basically means damaged. Constriction is tight or blocked. Symptoms is what you feel. Dyspnea is trouble breathing. Chronic is over a long period of time. So irritants, smoking, hazardous chemicals, I'm just going to group these all together and just say smoking. We want to keep it simple for now, and all these other details aren't really necessary to explain the core concept, so let's leave it out. So I've simplified this entire concept down to the idea that COPD is a disease where your lungs are damaged and blocked, making it hard to breathe. Lots of smoking can cause this. And that's it. A 5th grader should be able to understand that. Let's move on to step 2, similar ideas. One of my favorite examples of imagery is from med school. My critical care attending always talked about the lungs being like inflatable balloons, because when you blow air into them, they expand, and when you exhale the air out, they collapse. So when I'm solving problems or figuring out how certain diseases affect the lungs, I always imagine a balloon inflating and deflating. So why don't we add an analogy here? So if you can imagine breathing through like one of those paper towel rolls, it's probably not that hard because the tube is wide. But if you constrict or shrink that tube down to the size of a straw, it becomes a lot harder to breathe through. That's the analogy of a constricted airway, right? You're trying to breathe through a straw. Now, imagine having to blow up a balloon through a straw, right? That's terrible. But people with COPD just have to go through life breathing like that because their lungs have been so damaged. This analogy is really going to help me remember this disease. Let's add a story. One of the most common causes of COPD is smoking. You can imagine that if you inhale toxic stuff into your lungs constantly, sooner or later, you're going to damage your lungs, right? That's a logical story that should be easy to remember. I could also imagine a smoker smoking a cigarette and associate that cigarette with breathing through a straw, since that imagery looks kind of the same to me. And I've actually used this in the hospital to diagnose lots of patients. When I see a patient coming in and they're wheezing and they're unable to breathe, I automatically imagine them breathing through a straw, and I automatically ask them, have you ever smoked? Because that helps me figure out what kind of lung disease I'm dealing with here. So the overall goal of associations is to condense your notes from pages of text to more simplified expressions. This makes it way easier to make study guides that are just efficient to review. So for example, it can make mind mapping or flashcards way more efficient. I can replace the text with my associations and instantly make my review sessions much faster. So after you've gotten a handle on associations, you can check out this video here because we show you how to string together multiple associations in a way to remember massive amounts of information.